The new book, In Trump We Trust, E Pluribus, awesome. It's a hit. I'm actually going through it now, and I'm supposed to read the whole thing before I interview you on it. But as I said to the staff, I savor it. So I have to go through it on my own pace and reread portion. I am having a blast so far, and I got the audiobook as well. Looking forward to outtakes. Hopefully, if not, then I'll just re-listen to old outtakes and old audiobooks.
That makes me so happy.
You wrote about Phyllis Schlafly, who we've been talking about on the show. We had Ed Martin. Phyllis actually has a book out now. I believe it's her 20th, if not 21st book, prolific for decades and decades and decades. And just as someone who has really carried the torch for a long time with only one or two others in terms of top conservative activist women in America, how did Phyllis Schlafly, how did her legacy impact you as a writer and an activist?
I would like to think it impacted me. She's, as I say in the obituary, a lot of us get compared to Schlafly, often thinking that will be taken as an insult. No, it's like being compared to Winston Churchill. It certainly guided my view of the feminists and the media. I mean, even some of my liberal friends, I wrote about her, Phyllis Schlafly, in my second book, Slander, comparing her to Betty Friedan, who, constantly needed a man to bail her out, had that stupid Ms. magazine where they literally did have debates on whether it's appropriate for feminists to wear lipstick. Meanwhile, Phyllis Schlafly, while raising 6 amazingly accomplished kids and having a lovely life, first she was writing a lot about military policy with a General Ward, I think his name was, these long tomes. She was a big proponent of high frontier, then wrote A Choice Not an Echo that is credited with getting Barry Goldwater the nomination in an election much like the election we're going through right now. It was the grassroots against the back then much more northeastern elites. Now it's more the Washington, D.C. / New York elites. And although Barry Goldwater was, a very imperfect messenger, a cranky libertarian, that it took away the kingmakers, as Phil Schlafly called them, from choosing our presidential nominees, which is also credited with leading to Reagan's nomination. And one of our big fights, defeating the Equal Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, I probably should have mentioned this in the obituary. I told Julia Hahn by email one little interesting fact at the New York Times obituary. Although it was snippy, it had a lot of great quotes from Phyllis Schlafly. But one thing they noted was that she had not, leapt on the Equal Rights Amendment. She didn't even know about it. A friend, the Times reports, told her about it, and she stopped it dead. It was sailing to nomination. It was one of these feel-good amendments. But as I think all Americans are a lot more aware now, and in large part thanks to Phyllis Schlafly, you can't just attach random feel-good amendments to the Constitution. We would be living in a world right now, which, maybe is happening piecemeal rather than in one fell swoop. It would have been just turning, instead of from state legislatures, it would go straight to federal courts, whether you can have men and women's bathrooms, whether women would serve in combat. That would be taken out of the democratic process and given to the courts. And she wrote all these articles attacking the ERA in a very simple way that everyone could understand it. But years later, you'd see the exact same arguments being made in places like the Yale Law Journal. Oh, but the interesting fact on the ERA was that the person who first told Phyllis Schlafly about the ERA was my oldest brother, John, who used to participate in these debates in political debates in high school at the Source Library in Stamford, Connecticut. And they had invited Phyllis Schlafly to come and give a talk. And she wanted to talk about some military policy issue, but they wanted her to debate. My brother wanted her to debate the ERA and told her about it, and she instantly grasped what a horror this was, and that was the first time she found out about it. But she alone stopped it, and I quote George Gilder in the obituary saying, Congress, it was sailing through Congress, it was sailing through the states, the media were for it, both political party platforms were for it, but Phyllis Schlafly was on the other side, and that was enough.
Ann, we've excerpted your obituary, which you can read in full at AnnCoulter.com. We also have some highlights at Breitbart.com, and we've had a handful of great things. By the way, Matt Boyle does a long-form interview with Ed Martin, who runs Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum. That'll air on Sunday night on our Sunday edition of our broadcast. But, your obituary is quite substantial, and there's one paragraph that really resonated with me. I wanted to read it to you and hopefully you could expand on it. You said that Schlafly was as proficient as any law professor in the seriousness of her arguments. This is all the more impressive because she is writing for busy people, housewives and politicians, people who probably wouldn't mind a more purely rhetorical effort. But she never condescended to her audience, people who dismiss her as a mere rabble-rouser either haven't read her work or have no idea what actual, quote, scholarship would be. And this is something that really spoke to me as a media person. I'm not a writer like you are, and I think this is where you and I are kindred spirits, is that you're highly educated. I was always very lucky to have great schooling. Stephen K. Bannon, our executive chairman on leave of the Trump campaign, actually an intellectual snob, to be honest with you. And yet we're talking to the American people about very serious issues in hopefully an entertaining way. It's a lost art. It's something that's not prioritized. It's something that most of the conservative movement has utterly failed at. And the people who seem to be the best at it are the ones who end up kind of have fallen in line with Trump. Phyllis Schlafly, you, Charles Hurd at the Washington Times, and Drudge, and Matt Drudge, of course. I mean, these are the people who have the intellectual heft, but also entertain. And Schlafly got this.
That's a really good point. And you know who else is Donald Trump himself. I mean, that's part of his appeal that is so appalling to the intellectual snobs around us, as I describe in the book.
Yeah, and of course Milo crossed my mind as well.
Yeah.
Our friend, and it's kind of an interesting thing that Schlafly had, and I love this shift in the American electorate where you can be serious about the issues but also have a good time and be on the right, which is new. That's new for us, and you've been kind of the lone torchbearer there. But it seems like Trump has really changed the way we see the world in that regard. And tonight is the first time Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will be on the same stage. Shockingly not at the same time. I wanted to get your take on what's going to happen. Presidential Forum on NBC, Matt Lauer, alleged Clinton Global Initiative member, though that fact has been disputed. But the Clinton Global Initiative says he's a member. He's moderating. National Security Forum. What are you expecting tonight?
Well, this whole moderator and debate business really enrages me. As I've said before, why do we have moderators at all? This is crazy how the incredibly biased and disrespected, distrusted media has injected itself right into the heart of a presidential campaign. So we have 2-1 on these stages. Lincoln and Douglas didn't have moderators. We want the candidates to ask one another questions. It's one thing to have a referee who's making sure, that they're given, each candidate is given equal time. But why on earth should all of these Hillary voters be choosing the questions? I mean, as I don't know if you've gotten to this part in the book yet, my book, In Trump We Trust, but it's overwhelming. It's striking. There's no way we would have been talking about the issues we are talking about: sanctuary cities, anchor babies, building a wall, a deportation task force, the media's hysteria about all these tiny little, what are the specifics, and this level of detail. None of this would be on the table. I go through in the book, the very first interview Donald Trump did right after announcing he was running for president was an interview with Bill O'Reilly. First question, of course, is on ISIS, because that's what politicians and the media fixate on when they don't want to talk about immigration or anything that matters to an actual American. And then went through, Syria, Iran, the Quds Force. It was 100% foreign policy. 3 weeks later, the intro to Bill O'Reilly's show is, illegal immigration, a big problem in this country, and that's why Trump has risen to the top of the polls. He's greeted by 30,000 rally goers in Alabama today. This was all Trump's doing, and now the media is worming its way back in for the debate so we can, have a talking snowman instead of having Trump ask questions of Hillary and Hillary ask questions of Trump.
Ann, you've been very complimentary about Breitbart and what we've done lately. And I've done some limited media in the last few weeks, trying not to take too many of the corrupt bastards in the press seriously, but you have to play the game sometimes. And people are kind of ask a lot about how come Breitbart seems to be catching up to Fox and has probably even surpassed Fox in terms of influence. And it's all about immigration and trade and not being politically correct. That's it. It's not ISIS. Though we cover ISIS, I think, better than Fox does, but that's not the point. The point is that they were derelict on the two key issues that resonated with everyday Americans, which is that we bad trade deals, we got bad immigration, and they're too PC with the Megyn Kelly-ification of Fox. And last question quickly, the UK is going to erect a border wall. They're beating us to it. We don't know if it's going to be a big, beautiful wall with a big, beautiful door, but they're building a wall. This is the big breaking news, lead story at Breitbart.com. You might not even be aware of it yet, but snap commentary on that, Ann Coulter.
Fantastic. Walls make good neighbors.
Walls make good neighbors. The book,
and also,
Trump,
if I could just add one thing before we get to the book, you ought to put a video of Trump's the full press conference in Mexico. I was reading through that again. Yesterday. It is magnificent. He was lovely. He was firm, and he talked about the wall and said we support the right of all sovereign nations to defend their borders.
Ann Coulter, the book is In Trump We Trust, E Pluribus. Awesome. Her column should be out today at Breitbart News. We get it first by an hour, so Breitbart always the place to be for the latest in Ann Coulter world.